Welcome back to Coffee Break Science, sponsored by the NIHR BRC Devices and Advanced Therapies theme. Today, we're going to delve into endometriosis, a chronic condition where tissue similar to the uterus grows outside of it and can cause really horrible symptoms for millions of women across the world, including severe pelvic pain, heavy periods, and infertility in many people due to an array of different reasons which we don't fully yet understand, as we'll soon find out from leading scientist Dr. Charlotte Cassie. And we've also got an amazing patient advocate who will tell us all about her experiences. Tune in to hear all about it. Hello and welcome back to Coffee Break Science. Welcome, Charlotte. I'm so pleased to have you here. Dr. Charlotte Cassie is a postdoctoral researcher at Wellcome Sanger Institute, where she works at the Vento-Tormo group, and the group focuses primarily on female reproductive health, where they use a profile, predict, perturb, lab in the loop approach, where essentially they profile using large-scale single-cell multiomics, predict cell behaviors and interactions using bioinformatics and AI from these datasets, and then perturb using lab in vitro models such as organoids to test and refine these predictions, which feeds back into the profile and predict arms to improve models and our understanding of normal tissue homeostasis and disease. Charlotte's current postdoc project sits within the perturb arm, where she builds complex models of the endometrium, using cells from patient tissues to mimic the normal endometrium function during the menstrual cycle, which we'll hear all about shortly. Her work uses endometrial tissue from healthy individuals and those with endometriosis to understand how cellular and regulation differences in the endometrium itself may influence endometriosis pathogenesis. She was actually recently part of a team of scientists and illustrators who created the Pelvic Matters booklet on the Genome Campus, which essentially sets out to close this knowledge gap within the Wellcome Genome Campus community. By presenting reliable information in an accessible, stigma-free way, they are aiming to help everyone advocate for their own and their loved ones' reproductive health and to foster open conversations across campus. I've just seen the booklet in print and it looks amazing. Before all of this amazing work, Charlotte did her undergrad at the University of Manchester, where she studied genetics, and then she did her PhD at Darwin College at the University of Cambridge in Professor Fitzgerald's lab, where we met and worked together for a couple of years at the Early Cancer Institute, where she was actually generating in vitro organoid models of cell competition to study the interaction between esophageal cancer and its precursor lesion, Barrett's esophagus. Wow. I am so grateful to have you here, Charlotte. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Asin, and thank you for that lovely introduction. Thank you so much.
So can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up coming into this space of endometriosis research?
So I was very interested in science at school. My favorite TV show at the time was CSI. So I kind of was thinking about going into a forensics path. And then I had a very sensible chemistry teacher who basically said to me that this is a very oversaturated field. Why don't you go and study something that is a bit more broad? So I went to Manchester and I did biology. And I had a lot of friends who were very interested in zoology. And I thought it was so boring. For me, I just could not get interested in it at all. And I was kind of quite rare in that group that really enjoyed kind of lectures on genetics and DNA, kind of understanding transcription and how proteins are made. So I actually changed my field to genetics based on that. And then I kind of realized that what I actually am interested in was molecular biology, because there was a lot of fly genetics lessons as part of that, which is even more boring. So I kind of started kind of really enjoying molecular biology lectures, and I then got into cancer biology, and those lectures I found really fascinating. And I applied to do a placement in Australia, working in Frank Gannon's group to study breast cancer with epigenetic inhibitor drugs. And I really loved that, gained so many wet lab skills, and kind of knew, okay, like I want to go into this. So I kind of ended up working in cancer for longer. I did my PhD, obviously, in Rebecca's lab in esophageal cancer, working with organoid models this time. So kind of going from getting more complex models from cell lines to organoid models. And then I kind of was thinking, okay, I've done a lot of work in like cancer biology? Do I want to stay in this field, or do I want to kind of try now in my postdoc to look for something different? And that's where I came across Rosa's group, and they were looking for someone who had organoid experience, but to work in the field of women's health and endometriosis, which was something that I kind of knew very little of at the time. But I'd been hearing kind of more and more conversations amongst colleagues and friends about kind of women's health and how everyone was kind of struggling to get kind of heard or seen by GPs and for like their health to be taken seriously. And I was like, oh, this is maybe like a really good area that I could go into that is understudied, underfunded, that I could maybe have more of an impact than obviously in the cancer field, which there is lots of work that still needs to be done there, but it is quite oversaturated kind of with funding and groups, and it's kind of quite hard to make a little niche space for yourself in that. So yeah, that's how I ended up in the lab, and yeah, working on kind of, again, organoid models, but this time for the endometrium, endometriosis.
Incredible. And what a journey. I think it just goes to show how PhD subject area doesn't necessarily have to be the area in which you stay, but you gain so much experience and so many transferable skills that you're carving out this much more needed, as you say, sort of research area. Can you start by telling us a bit more about what we know about the pathogenesis of endometriosis so far and what the gaps are in our understanding?
So kind of first and foremost, like, we don't really know how endometriosis develops. It's still a very kind of grey area. And there's a few kind of reasons as to why we don't really have this knowledge, especially for endometriosis. So it's kind of a historically underfunded disease. And this has meant that we're kind of more than a few years behind maybe the rest of the field, say like in cancer biology, in terms of getting those kind of large patient cohorts together to kind of then really investigate like how endometriosis arises. So basically, we don't really know how endometriosis arises in patients. And a real kind of difficulty that we have in the field is that there is a huge amount of like heterogeneity, both between different patients who present with endometriosis and also within patients themselves, because endometriosis can have multiple lesions in the same patient. And these lesions can arise in multiple different locations, both in the same person and in different people. So most commonly, it can be found in the peritoneal cavity, which kind of lines the abdomen. You can also have endometriosis on the ovary. You can also then have a deep infiltrating endometriosis where the lesions go deeper into the kind of organs the peritoneal cavity lines. And then there's also endometriosis that's been found in kind of much more distant regions, the brain, the lungs, the diaphragm.
No way.
Yes. So it's a disease which is not straightforward. And as you can imagine, the year to diagnosis is 8 years, 10 months. So these lesions can be in these patients for a really long time. So you're getting a lot of genetic changes in the lesions themselves. And also, if you have lesions that are on lots of different organs, you're going to have cells contributing to those lesions that are from the original tissue, where that might come from, the host tissue that the lesion is attached to, and then also infiltrating cells that are coming from the immune system, from the peritoneal cavity, etc. So this is really kind of hard to pull apart exactly what is happening in that tissue, and then with that time frame to kind of go back to be like, where did this tissue come from? There are obviously like some theories as to where endometriosis like originates from, the kind of most popular being retrograde menstruation, which I think something that I didn't know myself is like that the reproductive tract is not like a closed system at the top. So it is lined by the peritoneal cavity, but where the fallopian tubes and the ovary join is not sealed. So what can actually happen is during menstruation, as well as like coming out and like out of the vagina, you can also get a backflow of menstrual fluid through the fallopian tubes and into the peritoneal cavity. Now, this retrograde menstruation is like really common in everyone, but it might be, and this is what we don't know, is there something inherent in patients with endometriosis that these bits of tissue are able to attach and propagate and proliferate and then remain in the cavity? is there something that's maybe more sticky about the peritoneal cavity? Is it something intrinsic about the tissue that's coming through the menstrual fluid? Is it that, in people without endometriosis, that you have a better clearance system with your immune cells to be able to kind of remove this tissue, and this isn't the case? So there's a lot of different things there that could lead to that. And that's just one potential way that endometriosis could be seeded. But obviously, there's also cases where you find endometriosis in prepubescence and also in like hysterectomy cases as well. Other theories which kind of can link to how the paper from our group may be able to help in the future is that during the development of the fetal reproductive tract, it may be that certain tissue, endometrial tissue, is kind of deposited where it shouldn't be, and then that then remains dormant essentially until it's kind of puberty, and then the symptoms start to arise from that. And that's just a few.
Very interesting. I didn't know that retrograde period menstrual flow was a thing. It actually, given that I'm working in the Barrett space still, it kind of reminded me a little bit of the pathogenesis of Barrett's, because of course that comes as a protective response to the retrograde flow of acid in the esophagus, which is also just a tube. Yeah,
like metaplasia is like a theory with endometriosis. So like if you have like the changing of one cell type to another, as well, is like a theory. So it kind of also fits with what the theories for Barrett's esophagus were as well.
Can we think of endometrial tissue as a benign tumor, because they seem to be able to grow sort of uncontrollably in some ways, even if it's maybe not?
So when I've been kind of thinking about this, like how you would describe endometriosis, I think it's definitely not a kind of like benign disease, in that it is almost like a chronic condition, and the symptoms and everything that patients suffer can be like extremely severe. But I think how it spreads and how it appears has a lot of parallels with cancer, especially kind of with like metastasis, where you have this kind of seed and soil hypothesis, right? Where you have the right kind of cell that, if it intrinsically can travel away from that tumor, and then because of that intrinsic ability can seed itself in that soil, which is that distant tissue, then that can grow. And I think that is very similar with endometriosis, where it's like, is it something about the endometrial tissue, or is it the kind of receptive tissue, or is it a bit of both? Is it the environment? But you are getting a tissue which is growing that shouldn't be there, persisting.
Super interesting. And do you know roughly what the prevalence of this condition is in the general population and the UK?
So it is 10% of the population. That is kind of the estimate. I think it's like 1.3, 1.6 million in the UK. It's a similar figure to, I think, those that have diabetes. Okay. So, which is obviously a much more well-known and understood disease. Yeah,
absolutely. It's astonishing that something that is affecting 1 in 10 people in the UK is so poorly understood, and incredible that your group is contributing to this knowledge gap. And I saw that your group has been very productive, recently publishing a Nature paper where you were also an author, where I believe you guys spatially mapped the development of the reproductive tract. Huge congratulations, by the way. But I know that your team has also generated comprehensive single-cell atlases of the endometrium in the past. So can you tell us about your findings here and how this would relate to patients?
So our group focuses kind of on generating these like big atlases, and we do a lot of single cell sequencing. And what we're doing a lot of now is spatial single cell sequencing. So where single cell sequencing is so great opposed to kind of bulk is that you can really see in exact, gene transcriptions in specific cells and specific cell types. And we're able to find a lot of cell types and define them that we didn't really know anything about before. And why this is so important is because we know very little about endometriosis. We also know very little just about women's reproductive health, homeostasis in general. And that also feeds into Valentina and Ceci's amazing paper about how the female fetal reproductive tract develops as well. So we're really starting as a group to put together this whole kind of timeline and atlas of female reproductive systems. And having this kind of knowledge about what is normal, what is homeostasis, what is the baseline, means that then you have a reference point where if you are sequencing for endometriosis or any other similar conditions or infertility and things like this, you kind of know what it should be. And because we don't know what it should be, how can we really know what's going on in those tissues and decide? I think the work that I did in the spatial reproductive tract paper was based on kind of fetal organoids. And what we were able to show there was that these endocrine disruptors that we can find in, BPA is what, you'll see a lot of plastic bottles that say BPA free, and these kind of phthalate esters, which are used in the manufacturing of plastics and are just kind of prolific in the world around us, have a potential to kind of impact fetal development just kind of by triggering the kind of estrogen pathways or blocking certain estrogen pathways. So I think kind of understanding how the normal reproductive tract should develop means that we can start to understand what happens where it goes wrong, and if that can be like an environmental impact. And I think this is kind of a hot topic with like microplastics and things like this. Like there's always this thing where people kind of jump on a hype of like, oh my gosh, like microplastics or plastics and, dangers with environmental toxins. And like, I feel like there's always something on Facebook every day about don't eat this, don't like do this, like your risk of cancer. But obviously like there are things that can impact. So to have really good reference studies like these mean that we can really kind of look at that with our scientific hats on. And, obviously with having this fetal atlas and knowing how this reproductive tract develops, for instance, you can then start to use that as a reference point if you wanted to investigate if endometriosis could occur right from this developmental pathway, because now you know exactly what cell type should be in what particular area. So yeah, I think it's just kind of building that home base of knowledge so that we can really like start to now pick out what can go wrong.
Those Facebook posts, unfortunately, are
it
just
does,
popping up left, right, and center about how certain fashion brands, fast fashion brands, are putting plastics into our clothing and how that's disrupting our hormones and why that's the reason why there's an increase in cancer. And I'm sure there's an element of truth in that. I think it's so important, like you said, to actually generate the data to show that whether this is true or not for women's reproductive health issues. So that's really exciting that you're working on producing this data. So can you tell us a bit more about how you're using these in vitro models to further understand the pathogenesis of endometriosis? So you mentioned the fetal derived organoids, and then for endometriosis, do you also have endometriosis patient-derived organoids, or is it more that you're trying to understand like the normal reproductive health first, and then kind of that's the next step?
So the work that I'm kind of doing myself is to first generate these normal endometrial organoids. What I do is that we have biopsies from patients at different stages of the menstrual cycle. And what I'm doing is from those tissues, we can get organoids and the stromal cell components, which we found to be important. It's important just for the general homeostasis of the endometrium in the menstrual cycle, but also there are stromal cells can be implicated in endometriosis as well. And in patients who have endometriosis, their normal endometrium can also have stromal cell differences and immune cell differences. So my kind of project is to build models using these organoids, which represent the epithelial proportions, the stromal cells, and immune cells, to try and build a more representative model of the endometrium. So I have this cohort of organoids that are from normal patients. They're utopic, as we call it, their endometrium. And then I also have cohorts that are also from the endometrium, but from patients who also have endometriosis as well. So the kind of goal of building these representative models is so that we can scale it in a way that we are sampling a larger amount of the population, often with cell lines, you have one cell line from one person that's been used for years and years and years for studies, might not be super representative of that population. So by having a large biobank of organoids, we can kind of cover a lot of the menstrual stages and also like as many people as we can. Also, though, what is really important when you're building in vitro models is that it can't be too perfect. You're never going to get the perfect model of the endometrium because that is the endometrium. And we can't just take samples from patients. We can't take samples from patients every day of their menstrual cycle and track them all through time. So being able to create something in the lab which is representative, but also we can do scalable science on that, whether that's drug screening, whether that's CRISPR screening, whether that's kind of playing around with factors that we think might induce endometriosis and things like this. So that's a way that we can kind of answer questions in the lab for the benefit of patients, but without too much kind of disruption or harm to any individual. So that's kind of the goal of the in vitro models. So yeah, my project is basically about scaling up, making it representative, but making it easy for us to get downstream data from that, and then sequencing that, comparing it back to our in vivo, so our patient data taken from the tissue, improve the model, and then see if we can then use it for like drug screening or to investigate specific scientific problems.
That's amazing and really clearly explained. Thank you so much. So it sounds like, as you said, this field is a little bit behind, some of the more, similarly prevalent conditions or diseases like diabetes and cancer. So I guess you have lots of progress to still make, but what would you say you are most looking forward to seeing in the next 5 years in endometriosis research?
So I think in 5 years, as we know in like kind of the science, is quite a short amount of time. But I think for me personally, I really would like to see a shift just in general for women's health to just be taken seriously. I think by having practitioners listen to and understand just women when they're in pain would make a massive difference. I mean, the time to diagnosis, 8 years, 10 months is a huge amount of time. And that is a really, endometriosis is debilitating for people. This is going to stop people living the life that they want to live. This might mean that people can't keep hold of a job. It might mean that they can't do the hobbies. They can't keep up with friends. And obviously, if this is happening in a school setting or a university setting, like people will suffer because of this. And I just think that is like really, that's unfair. And I think obviously it needs to start with women's health being taken more seriously. But then what's really kind of upsetting in this space is that we don't really have effective treatments for endometriosis either. So you can wait a long time to diagnosis, then you're diagnosed, that's great, okay, you know what the problem is, but then we don't have a solution really for that. So we also need to make huge advancements in not just the kind of treatment of the symptoms, which also can be quite ineffective or quite awful, being pushed into a kind of medically induced menopause. We're just kind of, we don't have anything to really treat the cause. So there's kind of a huge amount that needs to happen. But I think in 5 years, hopefully, although we're behind, there's a huge amount of effort now in groups. And obviously with single cell sequencing, with spatial, hopefully we can kind of fill that gap with really robust data sets quickly. And then hopefully we can kind of start to understand what is contributing to endometriosis progression, even if obviously, you can't maybe stop it happening, but if you can kind of reduce the symptoms for people so they can actually go and have the quality of life that they deserve to have. I think that really should be the main focus. And I think that extends to not just endometriosis. Obviously, there's a lot of similar conditions, adenomyosis, fibroids, that have really similar gynaecological kind of symptoms. And, also just kind of periods in general. A lot of things are just dismissed as, oh, that's just period pain. But that doesn't mean that just because it's period pain, if you're in pain, you're still in pain. And I think that's a really important thing that needs to change. And then I think then if that's taken seriously, then there's going to be a much more bigger push from the community because they need to find solutions. To kind of summarize a lot of that ramble, I think, yeah, I just hope that women are taken more seriously, their pain is taken more seriously. There is kind of an understanding that this is a condition that affects many people and there needs to be allowances for that, more funding so that we can keep doing the science that needs to happen, and hopefully now building these wide cohorts that encompasses, not just kind of traditional white European as well cohorts, but kind of expanding that kind of worldwide as well to then, build these cohorts where we have a rich data set that we can start to understand what's going on.
That's amazing. Yeah, I really do hope that there will be policy level changes to, increase the amount of funding that goes into understanding women's health conditions better, because if men were affected by these sort of conditions, I'm sure we would be in a much, better space in terms of
100.
the science and the data and for finding new treatments. And I think, the last point you made about creating representative enough data sets that cover, not just the Caucasian sort of women, but also expanding beyond that to understand more about, different ethnicities and how, given the heterogeneity of this condition, how it may present differently in different people is super important and so exciting as well. So yeah, looking forward to seeing how this progresses. Today, I'm joined by Sahir Ahmed-Evans, a women's health advocate and menopause and endometriosis coach, supporting women globally through education and empowerment. Sahir has lived through perimenopause since her 30s, chemical menopause, and is now in surgical menopause following a radical hysterectomy endometriosis excision. She uses that lived experience to challenge taboos, stigmas, and reframe menopause as the beginning of a woman's most powerful chapter. And I'm so delighted to have you here. Thank you so much, Sahir.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to get into this conversation.
So, if you don't mind, would you be able to start by giving us an overview of your health journey and experiences living with endometriosis?
Yeah, so my journey started a long time ago, a lot sooner than the last couple of years, and as you said, the surgical menopause, the hysterectomy. But that is almost the climax of my journey and my story. I think it was maybe 15, 17 years ago. It was after I had my last child, who's 18 now. And then I started to notice that I was just having a lot of symptoms. Heavy periods, painful migraines, chronic pain. I had a heart condition. I just was always really, really unwell. My periods would just wipe out weeks of my life. It wasn't like a couple of days done and dusted. I mean, they would literally put me in bed for weeks at a time. And I wasn't able to function, look after my children. And this just went on for years and years until one day I just remembered collapsing, rushed to hospital. I was told that I was at the point of a cardiac arrest, that my blood levels had fallen so low that literally I could have died at any moment. And I wasn't allowed to be left on my own. I was given several blood transfusions that night. And that hospital bed that night was a real pivotal point in my life. It was a turning point where I just thought, I can't do this. I can't live like this anymore. I don't want to live like this anymore, and I wouldn't want anybody else to live like this. So that was kind of my point where I turned my pain into purpose. And that's where I started my journey into health, fitness, well-being for myself, ultimately, yes, for my family, for my children, but also for other women, because I didn't want anyone else to feel that way, to hit that rock bottom moment that I just had. And that was the start of my journey. I became a personal trainer, a Pilates teacher. I started my business. And even though these symptoms were always bubbling away in the background, I do believe that I managed so well for so long. So that was over 15 years ago. And I have managed, and I've had points where I've even thrived almost. And I think that is because of the health and well-being and investing into myself all the time. thinking, nutrition, exercise, Pilates, stress management, and really always trying to better myself. But with a condition like endometriosis that was bubbling away in the background and I wasn't aware of it, even though hospital visits, I had scans after scans in these 15 years. I was back and forth to my GP and I was never getting any answers. I was, it was just a case of like, this is how it is. You just have bad periods. It's just a thing. Your scans are clear. And this went on until I think I really started to feel quite unwell in lockdown and COVID. It always stays in mind because it was COVID and everything switched to talking to your GP on the phone. And by this point, I was actually having the most bizarre symptoms. I was bleeding from my belly button. And I remember Googling it thinking, this is not normal. Even if they say the other stuff is normal, this is not normal. And no, it wasn't. But it did take until 2023 before I actually got referred to endometriosis department. So I went to the endometriosis clinic in 2023. And actually, they were able to diagnose my endometriosis very quickly. I didn't even have an MRI or anything. It was from an internal vaginal scan.
An ultrasound?
An ultrasound scan. And by just, palpation from the nurse specialist. And she confirmed, yeah, you have quite, endometriosis. And it was all just very rushed, though. I didn't feel like I had time to absorb it, process it. It was a case of, this is what's wrong with you. Surgery is just going to take forever. We don't have the capacity in the hospital. So we just, we think you should go into medical menopause. And it was just thrown out at me. And in that moment, it's a case of like, you have to make a decision very quickly because you think to yourself, it's taken me 15 years to get here. I'm not going to leave this hospital without getting some type of treatment because how long is it going to be before I get another appointment? So I agreed to be put into medical menopause at that time. So that was August 2023. And actually that was like this silver lining. I know everybody talks about menopause, but for me, it was just like the symptoms almost stopped. I went through a really bad period after it, period of time. So, I had a biopsy, which caused a lot of complications because of obviously my internal structure. Everything has changed. It wasn't easy for them to take that biopsy before they prescribed medical menopause. And I went home and the biopsy got infected and I had like the worst endometriosis flare that I've ever had because of the almost interference. The body just goes into this inflammatory state. So I was very unwell. Once that passed, medical menopause was my silver lining. And I was like thriving, I was doing fantastic. I started public speaking, telling my story, continued my work with my clients. And then come June 2025, I woke up this one morning and I've just never, ever experienced pain like it in my life. My husband called an ambulance. I was convulsing almost. I felt like I was out of my body. Like I wasn't aware of what was happening. And that was the start of a new set of issues. So whether the medical menopause had just stopped being as effective, I'm not quite sure. But it led down a path of, again, hospital visits, being dismissed, being told, just wait for your appointment. You're not bad enough to be in emergency. You shouldn't be in gynecology emergency because you're not tachycardic and you're not, you haven't got a high temperature. And I was in a really bad way. Like I could barely move. I was in pain. I wasn't able to work. And I thought, I can't do this again. I cannot be back here again. So I did contact a private consultant. He's actually the same consultant who's my NHS consultant, but I just saw him privately. He said, yeah, something's not right. Let's do an MRI. And everything moved very quickly from there. I had the MRI and we discussed surgical options, but I did take a second opinion because something wasn't sitting right. So I took a second opinion and I did go with the other consultant, which meant I had to travel away from home for surgery, but I knew it was right for me. It was robotics, like small port entry, everything was done robotically, so it was less invasive, I say. Like how can you be less invasive? But it was less invasive than normal surgery. And yeah, I had 4 months ago now, coming on 4 months ago, I had a radical hysterectomy, ovaries removed, fallopian tubes, cervix, deep endometriosis excision, and I had to have a bowel resection because it had gone really damaging my bowel. So thankfully, I didn't have to have a stoma bag, which was a worry for me, but they did have to take a portion out, which is it's a lot of adjustment after surgery. Yeah. So a resection takes, I think they took about 5 centimeters off. Yeah. So then you have a join, and eating and everything is very controlled after for some time. And it's 4 months, but my bowel is still, actually, I don't know what my bowel will be like now. It'll just be a new way of living.
Oh my goodness, you've been on such a roller coaster, I would say. I can't believe it took 15 years for them to pin down what the problem was. I just find that unacceptable, and I can't imagine the pain that you had to live with and just be told that, oh, you just have heavy periods and be expected to get on with your life. That's really shocking. But you're such a trooper for, using your pain, as you said, for your purpose. And I have no doubt that you are going to help, and you're probably already helping so many women who are either going through something similar or similar but different.
Yeah, I do hear from a lot of women who find listening to someone else's story, they maybe see themselves in it, see their own experiences, that they feel that connection to you because you're going through things, and it makes you seem real sometimes. As I create content, I'm on social media, and I think quite often we can see people who are doing that and not realize that they're just real people going through real stuff. And I want to share what the real raw stuff of life. That's my thing. That's what I want to do. And I feel like that's what I'm achieving. I find it quite cathartic for myself, to be honest.
It must be part of the journey of healing in some ways, by using that to make a difference for someone else.
Yeah, definitely.
And I don't know if you've read the book Pain and Prejudice, and it's all about.
I think it's in my list.
Yeah, it's. I think she also had endometriosis, or someone really close to her had endometriosis. So she speaks about medical negligence specifically affecting women more. Like if this was a condition that affected men, we wouldn't hear the end of it. No. But because women just historically and even now just put up with that pain or expected to get on with it, it gets ignored a lot more. And here we are, endometriosis research even is only just getting some funding, whereas other conditions have been looked at for years and years. Yeah, thank you for playing your role in making it more visible. And I think the more that clinicians also learn to recognize the symptoms, I think GPs just probably don't. They must not be trained well enough to be able to recognize.
Yeah, I think that first of all, it's the research, right? There's a staged. If the research is only just being done on all these things that are happening to women's bodies, and then you've got to act on that research, you've got to find the solutions, and you've got to train the medical professionals in what to look for, in how to put things together. I've said I've always had migraines, and they were actually my dominant symptom in a way. I think I even didn't give justice to my other symptoms because migraines would control everything for me. But it's only now actually I'm learning, and some research is being done, and it's being talked about literally since my surgery, that migraine, endometriosis and adenomyosis is very, very linked. I remember asking my surgeon this only a couple of years ago, and he just shrugged his shoulder and he was like, maybe, And I think now, well, if we'd known more, I wouldn't have suffered, I'm sure, for all this time, because we could, you can join the dots and you can figure things out, and you can maybe find some solutions, and maybe I would have found better solutions for myself. I didn't realize all these different symptoms I had were actually linked. So I think we are really not doing women justice at all. And it's actually, it just beggars belief that it's 2026 and this is the conversations that we're still having. And I get shocked myself. How can this happen?
Yeah, there are lots of medical and scientific professionals who listen to this podcast. So hopefully this is like a lesson for them. And I think there's things that people can learn all the time. So yeah, it's really important to have these sort of conversations and also to push back your medical professionals because actually you know your body better than them. Yeah, it's really important, I think, to champion for yourself. And
I totally agree. We have to advocate for ourselves and, you know, for those around us, because not everyone finds it so easy. It's very easy to just disregard, dismiss, gaslight. The amount of medical gaslighting, like obviously I have a lot of women who talk to me their stories. I follow a lot of women who are going through similar situations, and the things they get told and the things they have to put up with, it's really quite shocking. And I think we all have a part to play. That's the average person, that's the scientists, that's the medical professionals, the GPs. We all have a role to play in improving, you know, health, full stop. Definitely women's health. It has the least funding, it has the least attention. The research was generally all done on male bodies. Like there's just so much we still have to fix. But I think probably the ultimate thing that we need to work on is actually listening to women.
absolutely.
And then as women, we need to work on using our voices because that is going to be the change more than anything.
So you mentioned medical menopause. This came before your surgical menopause. And you spoke about it in a positive way because, of course, it alleviated your symptoms that you've been putting up with for so many years until, you know, more recently causing you even more pain. Was that through ovarian suppression, through Goserelin or Zoladex?
Yes.
It was. Okay.
It was, what was the name? Oh, Prostap. But it's this, I think it's Zoladex. It's the same thing. And in hindsight, did it help? I don't know. I think it just prolonged things. If potentially then in 23, when I was placed in medical menopause, if I'd had more interventions, if I'd had the scan then, it would have, I'm sure, shown the damage that was there then. But being placed in medical menopause, I don't think it fully suppressed actually the hormones because, yes, my period stopped. Yes, most of the symptoms stopped. But the damage that continued to happen to my organs continued to happen. The ovaries continued to grow, the cysts on them were growing larger, etc., etc.
I can't imagine it grew big enough to like spread to your bowels. That must have been so, so painful. I can't even like, I'm trying to imagine the body and like something going up that far. It's
Well, my surgeon, when they did the MRI, and on the MRI it showed like it was very low down in the rectum, which is why they warned me that we could have to do stoma bags. But then thankfully when they went in and they did the surgery, they actually lifted the bowel. They saw that the tumor, it was essentially a benign tumor, was higher up. So they were able to kind of remove it, take that part of the bowel out. But my surgeon himself was shocked and he said, how have you, I don't even know how you've been living like this for so long. Like, how did you manage? And I don't really know. You just do manage. You learn to manage. You know, and when a surgeon says that to you, actually, that made me feel very seen and validated. But from that conversation and from the surgery, there's been a lot of grief that I've had to deal with, a lot of processing, because it's like you're grieving what was and what you never had, the struggles you went through, how I pushed myself, how I didn't believe in myself at certain points when you get gaslighted and you just think, oh, it's just me then. I actually just need to be so much stronger than this. Why am I so weak? I need to push harder, you know, and I realize I've done that to myself as well, other people doing it to me. So there's a lot of grief that comes from that. There's been a lot of tears and breakdowns and meltdowns since surgical menopause. I think, yes, partly because of the hormones issue, but I think part of it is literally a grief leaving my body, like of what's happened.
of course. And is it grief around also, the hysterectomy and what that entails, or is it more like the pain that you've had to put up with and not being heard that is the main?
It's a bit of both. It's the pain I've put up with, what I didn't realize was going on, how I pushed myself so much, how I allowed myself to be pushed by others and not realize what I was actually going through. It's just like, I think to myself sometimes, oh, you were so hard on yourself. Like you were constantly bullying yourself. You allowed others to bully you. And then there is that grief that comes when you have such a big procedure that I didn't anticipate, that when you come out of it, there's a huge disconnect. Like I still don't feel very connected to myself. I sort of look at myself and I think, oh, who are you? And even when I sit with myself, I'm still in the place that I think, well, who am I? And I don't think it's a grief from like having removed the organs and like, the fertility or anything like that, which I know it is for other women. I think it's just almost that I feel changed. I don't feel like myself. I can't do the things I used to do. And I know that is just a process of time. I will get back there. But when you're going through the trenches of that change, it's really brutal to suddenly wake up and not be you. It's not been a process of being ill. When you fall ill, it's like it happens over time. And then it's just literally from overnight, you just wake up and you just, what happened to me? Where am I? So that there is a lot of that.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And like you said, it's only been 4 months. So now, you said that some of the grief was around how harsh you were to yourself, as well as other people being harsh to you. Now's the time to be kind to yourself because you've been through such a crazy roller coaster.
Yeah.
And you've done amazingly, and you're still, doing your coaching and empowering other women, and your fitness coaching as well, which is just amazing. And what I find really ironic actually is a lot of the people who experience, health problems are some of the fittest people that I know. You don't get sick necessarily because you've not looked after yourself properly. It's just genetic, fate, lots of factors.
Yeah, there is lots of factors that are part of the reason why these conditions happen.
So after all of that, do you have any last sort of message that you'd like to leave the listeners with?
I think I would say that it shouldn't be the case that people have to advocate for themselves in this setting, but unfortunately that is kind of the current situation. You're not alone. There are many, many people who are suffering from, similar conditions if people have endometriosis, and, keep pushing and fighting to be heard, because don't let them win.
Gosh, my goal for this year, I think it is actually to be kind to myself and to just take my time. I'm very much a person who puts deadlines on things. So, I might say to myself, or I would have said to myself, oh, I'll get back to handstands and pull-ups by my 50th birthday, because I'm 50 this year. But there came a point in time a few weeks ago that I thought, no, this is not going to work. This is still too much pressure. No time scales then. God willing, I will get back to it at some point. But even if I don't, I'm actually just taking it all the pressure off so that I can just let my body actually tell me what it needs to do and just go slowly. So I'm doing a lot less than I thought I would have been at this point. I think I thought I would have been in the major throes of rehab, and I've actually just gone with the flow and felt on a daily basis, what do I need to do? What is my body telling me? And it's actually, once I put that in my mind, it's working better for me. Because I can feel on a day-to-day basis, I need to do this today. This is going to feel good. Rather than what I necessarily would have had planned to do, because I'm very much a planner. So I've had to change things. So that's a big bullet to bite. And I think as a message for anybody really is that it's never too late. I get that question almost on a daily basis from lots of different women, lots of walks of life, who for some reason put that timestamp on something. oh, it's too late to look after myself, or is it too late to invest in myself? Is it too late to go to the gym? But no, it's not. It's never, ever too late to give back into yourself. If you haven't done it to now and you're now a grandmother, it's fine. Just start now. If you're just having your first child, just start now. The earlier, the better. Yes, I will 100% say that. The more you can invest into yourself, the earlier you can start to prioritize yourself. It's good for you and it's good for those around you, because it becomes the norm. Your children will understand that's how you need to be, your spouse, your family, because essentially, if you don't put that in place, no one else is going to do it for you. No one's going to say, oh, I think you really need to go and have an afternoon for yourself and go to the gym and do. You have to be the one who's going to say, I need this for me. This is for my well-being. And just start as soon as you can, but it's definitely never too late.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sahir. It was just incredible. We've just met, but I feel so proud of like what you've done, and I can't wait to see what more you're going to do. And yeah, I'm just so honoured that you accepted my invitation and came here to share your story.
Oh no, thank you so much. Honestly, I've grown to love speaking. I never thought I would have, but I love speaking and I love sharing my story and helping other women, empowering other women. It's just really a dream of mine come true. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Charlotte. It was a pleasure to have you here and to hear more about your research. This is the amazing booklet that Charlotte and her colleagues have compiled. It's super comprehensive, and also just the animations are really cute. I didn't think that the reproductive tract could look so like fun, but yeah, it's free to download on
Vento Lab website,
which will be linked in the description of this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.